South End, located just minutes from downtown in the Back Bay, is one of Boston's most popular neighborhoods. Boston's South End is largely built on landfill in what was originally a tidal marsh. During the mid-19th century, a series of landfill projects led to the developing dozens of streets and hundreds of fashionable townhouses. In the early 19th century, a strip of land known as the Neck along present-day Washington Street was all that connected downtown Boston to Roxbury and the mainland.
In the South End, you had a wonderful mixture of races and cultures and all kinds of people and all economic levels. I mean, there were people living in single rooms and in little apartments and what have you, and there were people who lived in 5-story townhouses as single homes.
I remember by the time, I was 6, 7 years old, most of the kids, my peers, we could all swear in 6 or 7 different languages: Greek, Armenian, Italian, Irish, Arabic.
So you had Near Eastern peoples, you had some blacks and whites, and you had a variety of incomes and so forth. That's one of the characteristics of the area.
By 1960, the South End was home to a mostly poor and working-class population of just under 35,000 residents from more than 40 ethnic and racial groups, a quarter of whom were African Americans. Over the next century, the South End will house numerous immigrant groups and become one of the city's most racially and ethnically diverse neighborhoods. Today's South End was created in a mid-19th century attempt at urban renewal. Built on mainland in Boston's South End, the area was developed to try to keep the middle and upper classes of the earth from fleeing the city before the waves of arriving immigrants. But the new South End, the original one was located downtown today, quickly lost the competition for that demographic to the even newer Back Bay.
And the reason they took the neighborhood was because they wanted to turn it into a commercial area, because Boston needed that, because companies were leaving, because they wanted to have loading docks. There were those kinds of businesses.
In 1961, more than 2,000 representatives sent delegates to the new South End Urban Renewal Planning Community, which was supposed to respond to the city proposal. In April 1962, the BRA presented 3 separate sketch plans to the SURC for its consideration. All 3 called for building new schools, streets, and housing, but they differ in how much of the existing house stock should be demolished, proposing 15, 20, and 30% respectively. But the committee didn't think any were just right for 2 very good reasons. First, all 3 called for demolishing a strip of buildings along Shalman Avenue to create a green belt running the length of the neighborhood. This will split the neighborhood into 2. One half slated to have low-income housing projects for families and the elderly, and the other to become a more upscale residential area and the location for new communities facilities. Second, because all 3 sketch plans called for building 2,500 units of public housing, all of it south of Massachusetts Avenue, thus further separating the haves from the have-nots. In the spring and summer of 1967, the South End Urban Renewal Plan identified the area in which most of them live as Parcel 19. The plan called for dislocating all the residents, demolishing the 4-story row houses in which they lived, and building new market-rate housing. With help from some long-time residents, the newer residents began to door-to-door champion to organize against the part of the plan. They did protest with the slogan, "We shall not be moved from Parcel 19," to against the proposal of building market-rate housing and call for building that they could truly afford. Plan for Parcel 19, creating a central plaza like those in the Puerto Rican villages and surrounding it with different kinds of housing that would be affordable to the people who already live in the neighborhood. ETC rebuilds the neighborhood in stage. First, renovates the row houses. Second, building a mid-rise building and high-rise building for the elderly. Third, building some 200 townhouses around the central plaza. ETC's new community came to be called Valley Victoria. Today, it included more than 800 units of affordable housing.
There are three famous landmarks in South End Boston. The first will be the South End's Franklin Square and Blackstone Square. Charles Buffage, who created the plan for the South End, originally intended two squares to be as one, calling the Columbia Square. Franklin Square opened in 1849, and the Blackstone Square subsequently opened in 1855. He said that the people should have the right to have clean air and water, freedom from excessive and unnecessary noises, and the natural, historic, and aesthetic quality of their environment. Additional improvements were done by the city in 1970. The improvement includes new light fixtures throughout the park. The fountains were refurbished and existing benches that were in poor shape were replaced with benches that were Victorian in appearance. The second, the cyclorama. The South End is the centerpiece of the Boston Center for the Arts, that once houses of the Battle of Gettysburg. When cycloramas went out of fashion in 1890s, the building hosted a number of other businesses, including a bicycle riding school, a garage, and the Boston Flower Exchange before it became an event of the gallery space. The BCA complex is home to a number of artist studios and black box theaters. Last, the Cathedral of the Holy Cross. The South End is a neighborhood of many beautiful churches. The most striking one will be the Cathedral of the Holy Cross. It is the largest Roman Catholic church in New England, and is certainly the grandest church in Boston. Although the South End was initially developed for Boston's emerging middle class, and the neighborhood transitioned to new immigrants, especially the Irish, as the middle class owners moved in. In 2018, the first major renovation of the cathedral began. During the process, approximately 8,000 square feet of reclaimed wood was salvaged from the building. The $26 million renovation was completed on Sunday, 2019. Located just minutes from downtown and the Back Bay, the South End has become one of the Boston's most popular neighborhoods. However, it is hard to believe that Boston's South End is largely built on landfill in what was originally a tidal marsh. In the early 19th century, a strip of land known as Washington Street was all that connected downtown Boston to Roxbury and the mainland. During the mid-19th century, a series of landfill projects led to the development of dozens of streets and hundreds of fashionable townhouses. Over the next century, the South End housed numerous immigrant groups and became one of the city's most racially and ethnically diverse neighborhoods. By the late 1960s, Blacks and Puerto Rican residents were fighting displacement through community organizing, public protests, and occupations. The new building was then created, the Villa Victoria. It is easy to notice it until now. Today, the South End is a vibrant center with a lot of diverse industries. Modern developments make the South End a true microcosm of Boston, where history and innovation are in constant conversation. Linked with brick Balfront tower houses, most of which were built in mid-1800s. Many of the homes will have hidden gardens. In some modern cases, churches have been converted to stunning high-end condos, which make far an utterly unique and rare home sitting with beautiful exposing stone, arched windows, and staircases.
In the early 1960s, Boston was home to only 6,000 Hispanic Americans. Most of them were Puerto Ricans, and many had come to New England to perform seasonal work in rural areas. Then, rather than return home where jobs were scarce, they had moved into the region's largest city to look for work. Many of these new residents gravitated to the South End because of its supply of rooming houses and still cheap apartments in tenements and brownstones. The old populations are Irish, Jewish, and British Americans. Unlike the poor immigrants who had been drawn to the South End 100 years earlier in search of any shelter, this new wave of newcomers was made up of middle-class professionals, including a sizable number of homosexuals from the suburbs or other parts of the country drawn to the New Boston. They were drawn to this particular neighborhood by its proximity to downtown, diversity, and acceptance of various lifestyles.
This data shows a lot of different categories. It shows age, educational attainment, nativity, ethnicity, labor force, and housing tenure, all focused on the South End. On this graph, we can see that the three top ethnicity groups in South End were white, which contains 55.4%. Then, the second are Asians, which contains 15.3%. And last, the third is Hispanic, which contains 14.5%. Following up with the housing unit by neighborhood graph, we can see that South End ranked 7th compared with other parts of Boston. Other graph about the neighborhood is about the population. South End ranked at 7 for both graphs. However, we cannot say there is a correlation between the size and population. We can see exceptions like East Boston and Brington in the graph. It is hard to see how the comparison between the different parts of Boston. So, whenever we arrange the data and based on the median, South End ranked 15 for household income. It is the same for family income. We can't see the difference clearly. Therefore, whenever we arrange the data, we can see that South End ranked 20 in family income.
South End Urban Renewal Planning Community Development Corporations are non-profit neighborhood-based organizations founded by public and private investors. They were created to build and renovate housing but have gotten involved in economic development, job training, and social services. United South End settlements had helped form dozens of small neighborhood groups and block organizations. Boston Redevelopment Authority has the sole responsibilities for urban renewal activities in the city of Boston. Emergency Tenants Coalition. On October 27, 1967, more than 400 residents turned out for a meeting at the South End Little City Hall and voted to form a community development corporation, which they called the Emergency Tenants Coalition. Over the next few years, ETC's membership will grow to more than 1,500 members, approximately 1,000 of them Spanish-speaking. Urban Planning Aid.
As technology and economic improve through the years, there are fewer projects for the whole community and tourists. Nowadays, plans are created by privately held companies. Normally, we can separate the project phase from BPDA into 4 phases before completion, which are letter of intent, under review, board approved, and under constructions. There are 4 major plans in Boston South End that fit in 3 categories. First, the Exchange South End is under review. It is a 1.6 million square foot redevelopment of the Flower Exchange site for office, lab, biotech, and biomedical use with a 1.1 acre publicly accessible open spaces, corner floor retail and other activity uses, and 30,000 square feet of client and cultural space. Second, the following projects were both board approved. 65 Burham Street. The project includes the construction of an approximately 79,000 square foot with a 5-story office and laboratory building containing approximately 2,000 square feet of first floor retail and approximately 44 below-grade parking space. It is a modification and addition of the old ones. Then, the 80 East Berkeley Street. The proposal calls for the construction of a 265,000 square feet 10-story office, laboratory and research and development building with ground floor retail and 200 parking space. Last, the 217 Albany Street is under construction. It is located at Albany and Herald Street in the South End neighborhood and consists of a construction of a 14-story multi-family residential building with new outdoor open space for use by union residents. The MBC would result in a decrease of overall units from 250 to 180, but an increase in bedroom from 327 to 353, of which 46 of these beds are IDP income restricted. The South End alone currently contributes over 20,000 jobs and 3.6 billion in output to the city's annual economy. Healthcare is the top industry in terms of both employments and output. From the two graphs, we can see that South End is comparably less educated. It is lower than the average compared with other parts of Boston in 1950. However, from this graph, we can see that South End education had increased a whole lot compared with Boston as a whole. People with bachelor degree or higher is 65% to 45%. South Boston had a comparable higher labor force participate in 1950s. Nowadays, South End had 13,387 jobs in 2014, and 28% of which were in healthcare and social assistance. South End had 19,900 people, which is 5% of the Boston resident labor force. 71% of South End residents aged 16 and older participated in the labor force compared to 68% for Boston. The top occupations of South End residents in 2015 were healthcare, social assistance, and administrative support. Real estate is one of the major indications that can tell us about the economy of that area. We can see that South End consists 3% of total Boston inventory of commercial office real estate. The neighborhood is major employment hub at the Boston Medical Center and Boston University School of Medicine, and has experienced an expansion of biotech-like manufacturing. As you can see from the graph, South End ranked the highest at 4 out of 5 categories, especially in healthcare. Last, you can see the asking rent increased throughout the years because income and rent are tied together. They grew simultaneously.